The Age of Anxiety in the West. Before 1914, there was a general belief in progress, reason, and the rights of the individual. The development in the world encouraged belief in a logical Newtonian universe, and the human mind as a rational tool to understand and comprehend the universe through wondering and intellectual investigation. The same objective view on the so-called universal truth were placed on the laws of society, in which every rational human being were able to think and act on. At the same time, the rights of the individual were increasing thought. Different places in the Western world, well-established social rights were spreading not just to the wealthy, but to the working class and even to women. In general, the view and thought of the future were quite optimistic in the years before World War I. Except a small group of idealistic, serious writers, this worldview was generally accepted. But in the years after World War I, people faced a view of the human race as one capable of tearing the individual and his rights and ideas apart. The old ideas of the rational, logical human mind had to be challenged, and other views of the human being as a somewhat more complex size were being brought up. The German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche is one of the most renowned thinkers of the late 19th century. He's both famous and in some way infamous for utterly rejecting the Christianity and proclaiming the Christian God dead. He claimed that ever since the classic Athens, the Western way of thinking encouraged a slave morality that glorified weakness and mediocrity and degraded the passion and human instinct that in his belief is what drives true creativity.
Logical empiricism is rejecting most of the traditional philosophical thinking. Wittgenstein, an Austrian philosopher, later immigrated to England, thought that the traditional philosophical thinking, the existence of God and the meaning of happiness, was senseless, since it couldn't be proven to be right by scientific experiments or by the logic of mathematics.
In these times of existential chaos, many looked for answers in existentialism. Most of the famous existentialistic writers were atheists, believing that there were no greater answer to the meaning of life. No supreme being of any sort had established the universe nor giving meaning to it. A human being simply exists. The only thing one could and can do to define themselves is to choose and to act. In the existential way of thinking, there's always a choice. The French writer and philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre is famous for an example he gave. If you're on a watchtower surrounded by enemy troops, you could choose to either die standing up or die lying down. The bottom line is that the choice is always there, and as a human being you have the responsibility to choose and define yourself through these choices.
In the literature, the novelists developed new techniques to express the new realities. The novelists in the 19th century had mostly written as all-knowing narrators describing realistic characters and their relationship to the society. In the 20th century, the writers focused their attention on the complexity and irrationality of the human mind. Some creative writers also turned their attention from society to the individual and from realism to psychological relativity.
Since the scientific revolution in the 1700s, science and physics was accepted in the inner circle of the thinking people. Physics had a big influence on people of philosophy, literature, art, and whatsoever. Science and physics was comforting to people who gave up religion and tradition. One of the big steps toward the new physics was the understanding of the atom. It was more like neutron and the electrons.
In 1905, Albert Einstein continued the Newtonian physics. He had a theory which postulated that time and space are relative to the viewpoint of the observer, and only the speed of the light were constant. In the 1920s, the heroic age of physics made its way. One breakthrough followed another breakthrough, and so it continued. In 1999, Rutherford showed that the atom could be split, and by 1945, 7 subatomic particles had been identified. At that time, all these new theories and discoveries were disturbing to many millions of people. It seemed like the new universe was strange and troubling, and everything was said to be relative instead of an absolute objective reality.
In the 1880, Freud, in the operation of the psychoanalysis, he analyzed dreams and hysteria. Freud means basically human behavior in itself is irrational. The human mind and behavior is a mix between sexual and aggressive desires and what a human can do, and at last ethic and moral, what a person should do. This is called the ego and superego. The kind of study became popular in the 1920s, and people could not only study psychology but Freudian psychology too. Here is a picture of the ego and the superego. Yes.
Ej, var den ikke gået i gang?
Ej, var den ikke gået i gang?
Jamen,